In this video, I want to share some specific notes mid-season, some observations around growing Paw Paw, a Simina triloba, from seed. So stick around if you're interested in hearing about that. We're a small-scale nursery in central New York, and we grow a tremendous number of plants from cuttings and from seeds, from runners, all sorts of different methods. And we found over the years Paw Paw is fantastic to grow from seed, but there's some specific attributes to them that you need to know about going into it, otherwise you can feel pretty disappointed. For example, here's an air prune bed. I'll link here to the concept of this. This is just one way of doing it, that is growing a whole bunch of different types of trees. These are all chestnuts down there and Japanese walnuts. There's some random sunchokes as weeds, but we'll let them grow. And here's a section that has been planted to Paw Paw at the end of April, and here we are in mid-July. And you'll say, wait a minute, you have nothing coming up. Where are your pawpaws? Even the mulberries have come up and they're doing just fine. Well, there they actually are. Tiny tinies. So the first and most critical thing is, let's say you've set in motion some pawpaw seed that you're hoping to grow into trees this year. If you're in the Northeast or if you're somewhere similar climate to us, expect to not see anything emerge until July, maybe even August. If you're further north, you might not see the plants emerging for quite a while. Keep the containers or the soil watered, keep them weeded, and keep your hope up. They may very well pop with no problems. It just takes quite a while for the pawpaw to emerge. Knowing that pawpaws take quite a while to come up from seed, and it's a lot of fuss to keep them watered and weeded that whole time, one consideration, if you have access to lots of rotting fruit in the fall, is to simply take the fruit and smear it somewhere fertile and out of the way in your landscape and let them come up. So here's a patch that 2 falls ago I smeared a bunch of fruit with the seed down in here under a gumi, put some mulch on top and just forgot about it. Last year they grew, but they got very small, and this year they're growing really nicely even though they're deep in the shade. This fall we can dig them up and they'll be second year pawpaws that'll be 12 to 18 inches tall. At this point you can see this elderberry is towering over them. The gumi is shading them. There's even hops running over them, and yet they're pretty darn happy. I think at some point soon I should probably cut some of the hops back and give them a little bit more light. But pawpaw seedlings are very happy with partial shade. As long as it's good, rich, deep soil, they're happy with whatever. But putting them in partial shade, especially when they're very young, takes a lot of pressure off of you needing to water them all the time, and they're less likely to get sun scald on the leaves. In fact, just to the north of this compost pile, underneath the canopy of all these grafted apples, we had great success in this area smearing a pile of rotten fruit, probably around 30 or 40 fruits. It's now grown back into weeds. We dug the plants out, but we let it grow for 2 years in here, and we had about 30 or 40 nice, almost 2-foot tall pawpaws grown in deep, rich soil right next to a gross compost pile. They took all that nutrient, they liked the shade, and they did really well in there. Here's a spot right next to our driveway that just to the north of these apple trees, which have been grafted over to different cider types, we had a raspberry patch in here, and a few years ago I smeared some rotting fruit. Wonder what that chipmunk is up to. Oh, they're eating a young hazelnut. Anyway, I smeared some rotting fruit of pawpaws underneath this raspberry patch, and now a few years later you can see basically in the shape of where the fruits were, basically smashed them in the ground, put some mulch on top under the raspberries. The raspberries got a disease and we cut them back, but even if the raspberries stayed, the pawpaws would be able to grow under the shade of them and push their way up. So rather than digging them up and transplanting them, we're able to put them, the rotten fruit, where we want it to grow, let it grow, keep an eye on what's above them and periodically cut that back. And once they're about 1 foot or 2 feet tall, you cut around them and lay that down as a mulch, chop and drop, and they can become the canopy in here. So there'll be a little thicket of pawpaws just to the north of these apples, and all we have to do is smear some rotten fruit in there. If you're thinking about getting into growing pawpaws from seed this fall, one other absolutely critical note: when you get fruit or seed, 100% do not let that seed dry out. So if you want to store them and you want to be precious about it, that's great. Make sure the seed goes into moist, clean towel, paper towels in a Ziploc bag in your fridge. Check them periodically. So if you only have 5 seeds or 10 seeds, you can plant them in the fall outside. Make sure they're nice and deep in the soil with a good mulch so they don't freeze too hard. If you have access to tons of rotting fruit, you may consider mixing them with moist sawdust and putting them in a crate buried in the ground. And then in the spring, the fruit will have rotted off and you can pluck out the seeds and plant them. But do not let them dry out. So pawpaw, pretty easy to grow, lovely massive native fruit to the northeast. Happy to grow under black walnuts, very tolerant of deer browse, tolerant of partial shade. Pretty wonderful all the way around. Again, the critical bits, do not let the seed ever dry out. Keep them moist, keep them unfrozen ideally. Do not put them in your freezer, that'll dry them and freeze them. And be very patient when you plant them out in the spring. Give them time to come up. Make sure you keep the areas watered and mulched. Keep an eye out for them, and if you're in the northeast and you're not pushing them, don't expect emergence before July. Be patient. Let them grow year 1. Ideally, they can be in a dedicated garden bed for 2 seasons, and then you'll have beautiful plants either ready for sale or ready to move out and grow in their forever homes. I hope you collect pawpaw fruit this fall and grow them from seed, and best of luck to you. Thanks for watching.